Is it the result of an uncontrollable spontaneous conflict, or does it mask a coldly calculated conspiracy? Let's uncover the truth in today's video. Part 1. From Friendship to Tragedy, The Roots of a Catastrophe. No one can deny that Rick Harrison, Mike Wolfe, and Frank Fritz were once vivid symbols of a nostalgically minded America, where value is found in worn artifacts and each item holds a story waiting to be told. Porn stars, led by Rick Harrison, and American Pickers, featuring Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz, ranked among History Channel's highest-rated reality series, averaging 5.4 million viewers per episode during their heyday from 2012 to 2016. All three personalities cultivated an exemplary image, men of the people, passionate about history and respectful of American heritage and tradition. But in the world of the spotlight, every bright surface casts a dark shadow. Swift success transformed Rick and Mike into astute entrepreneurs and skilled negotiators. Meanwhile, Frank Fritz, whose simple lifestyle and artistic soul set him apart, began to feel increasingly alienated. By the 7th season of American Pickers, clear cracks had emerged. According to a former production staffer, Frank was reluctant to commercialize his personal brand, whereas Mike and Rick actively pursued ancillary ventures such as opening antique shops, franchising their brand, and even launching an online auction platform. Ambition opened the door to discord. Rick and Mike, ever alert to market trends, recognized that brand expansion demanded more controllable faces. Frank, with his stubborn temperament and genuine passion for the intrinsic value of antiques, gradually came to be seen as a liability rather than an asset. Internal meetings grew tense. Major business proposals no longer included Frank. New advertising campaigns centered exclusively on Rick and Mike's images. Frank noticed the shift. The friends who once shared laughter and camaraderie now spoke to him in contracts, clauses, and legal counsel. Distance hardened into an irreparable rift. One anonymous member of the American Pickers crew revealed there were days when Frank spent his entire lunch break alone in his car. No one invited him to eat with them. No one checked on him. This isolation played out not only behind the scenes but also on camera. Attentive viewers realized that episodes featuring Frank became increasingly scarce. By 2020, Frank had almost entirely vanished from the show, officially sidelined by History Channel due to personal health issues. Yet the reality was far more complex. Beneath the veneer of illness lay a covert struggle in which Frank, isolated and disadvantaged, was being steadily pushed off the board by Rick and Mike's maneuvers. In a 2021 interview, Frank bitterly confessed, "I wasn't called back. I wasn't consulted. I'm no longer part of that family." A simple statement that encapsulates the agony of a man who once regarded his colleagues as brothers, only to be discarded without mercy once he no longer fit the brand's strategic objectives. The dissolution of their friendship was not the result of a single event but rather the cumulative consequence of greed, selfishness, and irreconcilable differences in life goals. Rick and Mike aspired to build an empire. Frank merely wished to preserve the soul of the stories they had once pursued together. And when those values ceased to align, tragedy became inevitable. When Frank Fritz quietly vanished from television screens in early 2020, the History Channel's explanation was astonishingly curt: he's recovering from major back surgery and needs time to focus on his health. That brief, impersonal statement came without images or press conferences. For many devoted fans of American Pickers, it felt like a curtain suddenly dropping on a beloved stage, leaving countless questions hanging in the air. Initially, the public was sympathetic. Everyone assumed Frank needed time to recuperate from the persistent back operations he had mentioned previously. But as months turned into a full year without any updates on his condition, concern steadily morphed into suspicion. How could someone who had appeared weekly on national television simply vanish without a trace? Strange signs began to emerge. Fans noticed that Frank was not only absent from the show but also utterly silent across all social media platforms. His personal Facebook account saw no new posts. The Instagram page he once used to engage with admirers disappeared without warning. Frank Fritz, who had been so open about his treasure hunting journeys, now seemed to have evaporated from the public sphere. Worse still, messages and calls from old friends went unanswered. A high school friend, speaking anonymously to TMZ, shared, "We were worried. We texted. We called. Left voicemails for months. There was no response." It wasn't like Frank at all. Any desperate signals from Frank, if they existed, were recognized far too late. Insiders close to him revealed that in the final months before his disappearance, Frank repeatedly expressed feelings of being watched and threatened. He began changing phone numbers frequently, avoided using his personal email, and refused to meet anyone except a handful of his closest confidants. One source even reported that Frank had hired a private investigator to determine whether his phone was being tapped. A chilling detail surfaced. Frank had mentioned that he was holding evidence powerful enough to bring everyone down, a dossier of financial records including undocumented cash transactions between Rick, Mike, and various third parties. According to a trusted friend, Frank had carefully stored these documents across multiple hard drives and safes to prevent theft or destruction. But Frank was not only quietly preparing for a legal battle, he was also seeking a media outlet robust enough to expose everything. Several sources confirmed that Frank had reached out to at least 2 prominent entertainment investigative journalists, expressing his desire to tell the whole story, unfiltered and unedited. A final meeting was arranged. Frank was scheduled to meet a reporter on July 14, 2022, at a small cafe in Iowa where he had lived for many years. But he never showed. Instead, roughly 24 hours later, neighbors began noticing odd indicators around his home, an overflowing mailbox, lights left on throughout the night, and his dog barking incessantly. A concerned friend called the local police to check on him. When they forced entry, the house felt frozen in time, dinner half-eaten on the table, his phone lying forgotten on the sofa, and most importantly, no sign of Frank. The preliminary police report noted no evidence of forced entry or a major struggle. Yet small details, such as unfamiliar footprints on the doormat, a scratch on the hardwood floor, and a missing external hard drive, prompted investigators to classify Frank's disappearance as potentially criminal. Despite this, nearly a year passed without significant media attention. There was no large-scale search effort. No public appeals from former colleagues. Silence reigned, as if Frank Fritz had never existed. Only his family and a few loyal friends continued to pursue leads, offering a $10,000 reward for any information leading to his whereabouts, a substantial sum for a middle-class household. It was not until early 2024, when a leaked video from the courtroom where Rick Harrison and Mike Wolfe stood trial surfaced, that America was jolted by the dark truth behind Frank's disappearance. In the footage, Rick chokes back tears as he admits, "We didn't save him. We let him die." That confession not only shattered the hearts of viewers who once loved the television trio, but also ignited the largest legal investigation in the history of American reality TV. It posed an inescapable, haunting question. Did Frank Fritz die by a moment's reckless choice, or was he the victim of a long-planned conspiracy designed to silence him forever? Subsequent legal documents revealed that Frank possessed financial evidence capable of dismantling the empire Rick and Mike had built over more than a decade. Had those papers gone public, not only would their personal reputations have crumbled, but so too would the network of sponsors, business partners, and even the broadcasters who aired their shows. But Frank never got the chance to bring the truth to light. A shadow of power and greed moved first, permanently extinguishing the voice of a man who only wanted his story to be heard. On the evening of July 13, 2022, the small town in Iowa lay sweltering under humid summer heat, unaware that a tragedy would unfold just a few streets away. At a modest house at the end of Franklin Street, Frank Fritz was preparing for a meeting that could change his life. In the living room, financial dossiers, photocopied contracts, and several draft emails of accusations were neatly arranged inside a worn black briefcase. Frank, who had long lived for the thrill of uncovering forgotten history, was now poised to exhume the darkest secrets of the men he once called brothers. According to traffic camera data collected from the area, at approximately 8:02 p.m. that night, 2 vehicles arrived near Frank's home, a black SUV and an older Ford pickup, later confirmed to be owned by Rick Harrison and Mike Wolfe, respectively. Both vehicles approached in silence, their headlights turned off, and halted about 50 meters from the house. The occupants emerged, baseball caps pulled low, and quickly made their way toward the front door. A neighbor security camera, though grainy, captured the silhouettes of 2 men standing at Frank's doorway. There was no sign of forced entry, indicating that Frank had likely opened the door himself, either out of trust or perhaps because he did not suspect this would be his final encounter with old friends. From this point onward, the details become fragmentary, pieced together from scant physical evidence and a corrupted audio recording recovered from Frank's handheld recorder. Yet they suffice to reconstruct the night's events. Investigative reports indicate the meeting began with heated words. Rick's voice rang out first, angry and hoarse. "You think you can do this and get away with it?" Frank, refusing to back down, retorted, "I only want the truth. I've put up with you long enough." The exchange quickly escalated out of control. Mike, who had typically served as the group's peacemaker, was uncharacteristically silent, interjecting only occasionally with urgent pleas, "Frank, stop. We can resolve this without making a scene. But Frank stood firm. He had resolved to expose everything, consequences be damned. According to the damaged recording, he declared, "I've sent the documents out. If anything happens to me, everyone will know." That moment marked the turning point. A loud crash echoed through the room, the sound of a heavy object striking wood. Later acoustic analysis determined it was likely the sound of a body or piece of furniture toppling over in the living room. Frank was thrust backward. His head struck the edge of the coffee table with brutal force. In that instant, his chances of survival began to slip away. Instead of calling for medical assistance or seeking help, Rick and Mike panicked, choosing the worst possible course: silence and concealment. Crime scene reconstruction suggests they dragged Frank into a corner of the room, wiped away obvious bloodstains, and attempted to erase all signs of struggle. They removed the briefcase containing the evidence Frank had painstakingly assembled and then vanished into the darkness. A chilling detail survived: the recorder that Frank had used to capture the conversation, knocked free during the altercation, continued recording. The heavy atmosphere that followed in the ensuing minutes. One can hear Rick whisper, "No one must ever know about this. We have no way back." At approximately 9:15 p.m., the two vehicles departed in the same order in which they had arrived. A witness 3 houses down recalled the engines revving as though someone were fleeing in panic. Frank Fritz died alone and in agony. The medical examiner's report confirmed his cause of death as severe traumatic brain injury, while noting that prompt medical intervention could have afforded him a survival probability exceeding 70%. He was denied that chance. In the days that followed, Frank's home became a silent repository of untold secrets. His living room, once a sanctuary of curiosities and vintage treasures, stood desecrated, the echoes of violence saturating the very walls. Dust settled over remnants of a life abruptly severed, half-labeled boxes, old photographs curling at the edges, a coffee cup still warm enough to betray how little time had passed between casual routine and irrevocable tragedy. For days, no one claimed his mail. The newspapers piled up, and the neighbors, increasingly uneasy, whispered their theories with a caution reserved for true crime rather than neighborhood gossip. Behind closed doors, law enforcement hesitated. Frank's disappearance, initially filed as voluntary due to his known medical conditions and past struggles with depression, failed to trigger the red alerts it so desperately warranted. The first responding officer, a young deputy barely a year into the force, marked the case low priority in his report. It wasn't until Frank's sister filed a missing persons report, citing his meticulous habits, the missed meeting with a journalist, and the abandoned state of his home, that the gravity of the situation began to sink in. But by then, too much time had passed. Digital security footage from neighboring homes was overwritten. The corrupted audio file retrieved from Frank's recorder was difficult to authenticate and dismissed by skeptical attorneys as inconclusive. The briefcase, the very thing that held the explosive truths Frank had so feared to lose, was gone without a trace, never surfacing in pawn shops, storage lockers, or digital clouds. Even more chilling was the absence of any tangible remorse from Rick Harrison and Mike Wolfe in the days following. While fans speculated online, sharing before and after screenshots and blurry neighborhood clips, both men maintained an eerie silence. When questioned in early 2023 by a persistent freelance reporter, Rick gave only a cold, calculated answer: "Frank was a good man. We wish him peace, wherever he is." Mike, more visibly shaken, offered no public comments, choosing instead to retreat from the media spotlight entirely, shuttering public appearances and cancelling events under the vague banner of mental health leave. But whispers had already become roars. Reddit threads with thousands of comments debated the inconsistencies in the timeline. Digital sleuths uncovered deleted footage from an old American Pickers episode that showed tension between Frank and Mike during a stop in Des Moines. Former crew members began to speak up, anonymously at first, revealing tales of exclusion, shouting matches, and legal threats exchanged behind closed trailers. One camera operator described a day in 2019 when Frank was told not to show up for shooting because Rick needed space. That same day, Rick was seen at a closed-door meeting with producers, discussing rebranding options without Frank's name attached. By mid-2024, the mounting evidence forced the hand of both civil and criminal investigations. The Iowa State Police reopened the case, now classified as a suspected homicide. Forensic analysts were brought in to re-examine the site. Despite the elapsed time, they managed to recover minute traces of blood beneath the floorboards that matched Frank's DNA. More significantly, partial fingerprints lifted from the coffee table edge matched both Rick and Mike, though, frustratingly, This did not conclusively prove foul play given the trio's long-standing personal history. The turning point came when a whistleblower, once a low-level intern at the production company, handed over a confidential memo from 2019. The internal document detailed contingency plans for phasing Frank out of the series, citing his inability to align with modern branding and growing unpredictability. Shockingly, it also referenced potential reputational risks if Frank became litigious or attempted to expose financial details not intended for public consumption. The language was stark, the intent unmistakable. The ensuing trial that began in late 2024 became a media spectacle. Dubbed the reality TV reckoning, it attracted international coverage. Courtroom sketches appeared in newspapers next to images of the golden era of American pickers, highlighting the stark contrast between camaraderie then and courtroom betrayal now. Prosecutors laid out a compelling narrative. Two men, driven by empire building and brand preservation, turned on a third who no longer fit the profitable mold. Though the case lacked the classic hallmarks of murder, a body, a murder weapon, or clear eyewitness testimony, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. The corrupted audio, when cleaned up by forensic audio experts, revealed more than just shouts and pleading. It included a chilling statement, "We can't undo this, Rick," clearly spoken in Mike's voice. The silence that followed, haunting in its finality, was interpreted by many as the sound of guilt settling into their bones. Frank's family, quietly devastated, filed a wrongful death lawsuit in tandem with the criminal trial. Their attorney, a seasoned litigator known for taking on corrupt institutions, delivered an opening statement that left the courtroom in stunned silence. Frank Fritz was not just a co-star. He was not just an antique hunter. He was a man whose integrity outlasted his fame. And for that, he paid with his life. On the stand, Rick's demeanor was emotionless, cold, even. Under cross-examination, he admitted to the meeting with Frank the night he vanished but denied any physical altercation. Mike, visibly shaken, broke down in tears multiple times, contradicting parts of Rick's story. When presented with a cleaned audio clip, Mike slumped in his seat. He requested to speak privately with the judge. What followed was a sealed testimony, rumored to be a partial confession and a damning account of what had truly happened that night. In the end, the court ruled in favor of the Fritz family in the civil case, awarding them $5.8 million in damages. As for the criminal trial, the jury remained deadlocked on the charge of second-degree murder. Ultimately, Rick and Mike were convicted on lesser charges: obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and criminal conspiracy. Both received multi-year prison sentences, reduced in exchange for the location of Frank's missing hard drives, which they had reportedly buried in a remote Arizona desert site known to them from past picking adventures. The recovered data proved every claim Frank had made. There were emails detailing off-the-books payments, falsified auction records, and deals made with shady antique resellers in cash-heavy backroom exchanges. There were contracts showing producers had offered Rick and Mike undisclosed cuts of merchandising profits while deliberately cutting Frank out. The documents, now archived by federal investigators, marked one of the most damning internal exposures in television history. For many fans, it was too little, too late. Vigils were held in cities across the Midwest, where Frank had once roamed country roads in search of rusted signs and gas pumps with sentimental value. Hashtags like #JusticeForFrank trended for weeks. A memorial bench was placed outside his favorite Iowa diner, etched with his most famous quote, "Every piece has a story. Every story deserves to be heard." The network that had aired American Pickers and Pawn Stars issued a tepid apology, followed by the quiet removal of both shows from its lineup. Years of content were scrubbed from digital libraries. Lawsuits from former employees soon followed, alleging unsafe working conditions and hostile work environments. Reality TV, once the safe domain of light-hearted escapism, now stood on trial itself. As of early 2025, a documentary is in production chronicling the rise and fall of the trio. Titled Rust and Betrayal, The Frank Fritz Story, it promises to deliver an unflinching look at fame, brotherhood, and the consequences of unchecked ambition. Frank's sister, now the executor of his estate, is serving as a producer, determined to preserve his legacy on his terms. And somewhere in the quiet corners of America's heartland, among the dusty barns and forgotten shops Frank once loved, the air still carries echoes of a man whose voice was silenced, but never forgotten. Though the truth emerged only after his death, it burns brighter than ever in the hearts of those who watched, listened, and believed.